You'll be glad to know that I read your LinkedIn articles. I think you wrote one at the start of the weekend. Global Risk Radar, for now, the bear still sleeps. My question to you is the bear still asleep? Is this a tantrum or a moment of terror?
Well, I think a moment of something is what we have here. Certainly the last hour watching the U.S. indexes was a bracing moment that we haven't seen in a long time. We've gone 19 months without a 5% sell-off, and so volatility is back. That's what we know in the short term. When we look at that longer-term picture, we do see the synchronized global growth still in place. You mentioned the German factory orders. We've had strong non-manufacturing ISMs in the United States. One of the things that we were concerned about that we think helped precipitate a sell-off was that spike up in the 10-year bond yields close to 2.9. We had said that we think that the rally will stay intact this year over the longer term, as long as those yields stay below 3%, and now we've seen it fall back again. So we see strong fundamentals in place, but the market is not super cheap. Complacency is very high, and so a sell-off, looks like it's in order, and it's hard to say that it just stops with 1 or 2 days.
We're keeping an eye on those US futures, and they are now in positive territory on a number of counts, so we'll keep an eye on those. A bit of a real turnaround from the middle of the Asian session, where we saw the US futures down another 2% or so overnight. We'll keep an eye on those, Mark. But do you see the bull market for stocks then is still intact? Because I think you wrote that after Friday's sell-off. Would you write the same again?
We would write the same again. There are very few signs that there's anything close to a recession for the global economy in the works for 2018. That picture hasn't changed. And again, for us, a key measure before we would start to change our view is what's going on with the bond market, and we think that's contained. Just before coming on, I had the pleasure of talking with colleagues in Asia. And I think what's different this time than previous sell-offs and periods that gets referenced is the tremendous growth out of Asia and how that is kind of a counterweight to what happens in the United States and Europe. And certainly we saw a sharp sell-off there, but we saw some recovery off the lows. And our client base in Asia, they're not panicking, and the sell-off has been relatively orderly.
Okay, so the clients in Asia aren't panicking, and as you said, there's lots of various voices out there, Mark, that we can turn to for reference. We're using Paul Tudor-Jones, who's talking about inflation. So let's just talk about that. Inflation is about to appear with a vengeance. He referenced markets being similar to Japan in 1989. And the United States in 1999. I mean, try and square that away with the house view at UBS. Is inflation, as you say, if the issue started in the bond markets, do you believe inflation will show a vengeance in 2018, first of all?
No. The preferred measures that the Fed looks at are about 1.5%. So that's well below the 2%. So there's room for inflation to pick up just to get within the comfort zone. And indeed, Mario Draghi has said they cannot declare victory yet on inflation returning to their target levels. So I think that there's still a note of caution even from the central banks here around the topic of inflation.
When you look at the amount of volatility we've had in markets, Mark, we're just showing there a chart of the Dow just in yesterday's session. We saw the VIX with the largest one-day move on record. What kind of volatility do you think that suggests for future? Do you see these conditions continuing?
Well, I think that normal volatility for equity markets, even in bull markets, you do see 10% corrections from time to time. So just a return to normal volatility for the markets, the kind of volatility that put the gray hair on my head over the past 20 years, feels like a shock now, and it's very painful. But something more normal as central banks begin to normalize their policy should be expected. And I think that people need to be prepared for that, but also realize that even in a more volatile market, equities can continue to move higher as long as those fundamentals remain in place.